All right, welcome. Welcome to the Monday, June 17th, 2019 work session of the Falls Church City Council. We're delighted you all are here with us this evening. Guess we should just go to the first item on the agenda. We did have a great groundbreaking ceremony on, what is that, Friday? Very nice, long time coming, huh? Good stuff. Anyway, let's move on to senior and disability tax relief. Mr. Shields, you want to introduce the matter?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. So our agenda tonight is we'll start off with discussion of senior tax relief, and then from there a discussion of our demographics chapter of the comp plan and housing chapter of the comp plan. So to start things off for senior tax relief, our treasurer Jody Acosta and our deputy treasurer Nikki will be here to provide the staff report. What everyone should be looking at is the one that says version 2, and this is being distributed at the dais. We had a Scrivener's error in the version that was posted on Granicus, and we've put into the ordinance a key provision relating to deferral of taxes for certain properties. Just by way of a quick introduction, the council will recall that when you voted on the FY20 budget, there was an allocation of $390,000 for tax relief, and that covers all elements of tax relief, including those that are required by the Virginia Constitution and under state law. But we also had a discussion about our city policy for tax relief for seniors and those with disabilities, and the council adopted a budget that has $108,000 of funding in addition to what we've had in years past, with the understanding that then the policy change would come before you at a later date. So now we're at that later date, and we have a draft ordinance that reflects the recommendations of the task force that did its work and provided its recommendations that went into the budget back in February. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Treasurer Acosta for a review of what those policy changes are.
Okay, I'm on. Thank you all, and I'm glad that we're finally here with an ordinance. When we talked before, we'd sort of given you a general overview of what the working group had recommended, and now we have it in ordinance form, and I'm excited to be presenting it to you here tonight. First, there are a few questions. I hope you all got the research, the email that I sent out last week with all the research. Some comments from Wyatt about the research, because Mayor Tarter expressly had asked for some empirical data on tax abatement versus tax deferral. So we were able to find the Shan study from 2016. And if you all didn't get that, let me know. I'll get it to you. But it was sent out last week. So I thought I'd go over the changes to the ordinance first. We'll start with that. And basically, our working group is recommending several proposed changes. One is to increase the maximum tax exemption benefit to 100% of the tax bill for those who qualify based on their income up to 40% of the HUD AMI, area median income. So, and currently that's at $37,250 for household income. From 41% to 60% of the HUD AMI, we were recommending 75% exemption or abatement of the tax bill, and that would go from $37,251 to $56,280 for the annual household income. Up to 80% AMI, which is $62,000 annually for the household, we're recommending 50% abatement. And then between 81 to 100% of AMI, which is up to $117,200 annual income, deferral only option. We also would recommend eliminating interest on all deferred taxes beginning July 1, 2019. This would not affect the balance on any existing deferred taxes, but just there would be no further interest accruing after July 1 of 2019. And these first two changes would bring our tax relief program closer to the benefits provided in neighboring jurisdictions, which was one of the charges of our working group, to look at our neighbors and see what they were doing and how we compared. It would provide a larger benefit for our seniors with the greatest need. And it would encourage seniors to stay in their homes, to age in place, thereby helping to maintain affordable housing stock and provide age diversity in our population base. The tax deferral provision would eliminate interest and remain available to any household eligible for tax abatement, and they could defer their balance at 0% interest, as well as the household with combined incomes up to 100% of AMI, between 81 to 100%. And just as a note, the average real estate tax bill in the city for current recipients is approximately $7,100 a year. Number 3 is we would reduce the asset limit from $540,000 to $400,000. And this is excluding your home, the dwelling, and up to 1 acre of land in that asset calculation. Any household with a financial net worth greater than $400,000 but not exceeding $540,000 would be eligible to defer their tax bill or any portion thereof at 0% interest. Change number 4. In cases where the assessed value of the dwelling plus up to 1 acre of land is 125% or more than the average assessed value in the city for single-family residences for that year, no exemption would be permitted or no abatement would be permitted, but it was deferral only. So those people would still be allowed to defer if they qualified in every other way. We also, number 5, would move the tax relief year from a calendar year to a fiscal year basis, just to align the tax relief process with the city's fiscal year billing for real estate. And in addition to those changes, we changed some wording in the ordinance. We just updated it to clarify without making any substantive changes. We had several attachments, a summary. I think probably the best would be this, the summary sheet that looks like this, and it just sort of summarizes all of the changes that I just talked about. Summary notes down on that bottom row of this sheet. The average assessed value of homes in the program is about $525,000. So 100% tax relief on that would be $7,100 a year. The average length of time that people are in our tax relief program is about 10 years before they either sell their home and move or go into assisted living somewhere or they're deceased. So currently, our regular tax relief is about, or tax abatement, is about $140,000. Deferred tax is about $40,000 a year, and the veteran tax relief is $100,000. So what we're proposing is to, with that increase in the tax abatement, would go no higher than $265,000. We don't think we're going to see a great increase in applications because, first of all, if people are shopping around for a tax relief program, where to move, where they can get a good tax relief program, our neighbors actually have a richer program that would benefit them more. So we don't think we're going to see a great increase, but time will tell.
So can you repeat that again?
We don't think we're going to see a great increase in applications because, for one thing, our neighbors have richer programs than we do. They allow.
It's going to sell their house and they can move to another place just for the deferment. Right? If you're
Right.
80, you're not going to go move.
People
to,
generally aren't going to shop around for this, but if they were, they probably would not choose Falls Church to come to it, if that makes sense.
And so, remind me, the idea of look, we're going to have a finite amount that's going to be available. How did that all come down, and the legality of that?
Well, we took the existing people in the program, plus people that have expressed interest in applying under the newer guidelines, which were about 6 or 7 more people. And we assumed that, let's say they all qualify, and we looked at the income, that they already have, that we already know, and we assumed that all the new people did qualify. We would come up with this maximum amount of, what did we say, 380? 390, thank you. Yeah, 390. So that's how we arrived at that figure.
That's just your estimate.
That's correct.
And so we can't legally say, this is the pot of money, this is all there is, first come, first serve,
That's
first serve, correct?
Right. If they apply and they qualify and, they fit our guidelines, then yes,
We have to
they would
give it to-
receive abatement or deferral, whichever they qualified for. In years past, we have tried to estimate on the high end, and I don't think we've ever gone over since I've been here. I don't think we've ever gone over the amount we budgeted.
Okay, thank you.
So in that particular case, Jody, if we don't have a defined bucket of money and we find out in a year that we've exceeded that amount, where does that money come from?
Well, it comes from the general fund. I mean, we'd have to come up with it. It's like anything else. If you're going over budget, you're hoping that you're going to have some savings somewhere else that would cover it. But
Now, would that be something that comes back as a specific request to council, or would that be just appropriated from somewhere else?
So I think that a way to look at this is as this is creating a class of people who are entitled to a benefit. And if more people come forward to use that benefit, then under this ordinance, those benefits are dispensed. When this was discussed with council last time, there was a discussion, could we make it first come and first serve, that just let people know, hey, this is the budget, and if you miss it, you miss it. And we did not find a way legally that really made sense. We can give the council regular reports so the council is aware of it, but there wasn't a way to cap it through the budget process.
So what is, I know, Jody, in passing, when we spoke since the previous session, you said that there were some changes that you had made in terms of this particular ordinance based on comments from the previous work session. What were those specifically? Obviously, the 125% is
Right.
different. That's interesting. I want to ask you a question about that. Was there anything else in this particular language or the
I
calculation?
don't believe so. I think we were trying to address the people who are sitting on quite an asset. 125% of our current average assessed value would be like $890,000. So that's a substantial asset. So we were trying to address the concern of people who were sitting on that large asset and still receiving an abatement from us as opposed to a deferral. And we looked at some other localities and what they do, and we thought this would be a good way to address that.
I would say I was pleased to see that, because I did allay some of the concerns that I had about sitting on a very, very expensive,
Right.
high-value
In Arlington,
property.
the Arlington County study, when they talked about that, they talked about people in the $1 million homes, and that just didn't quite seem fair to be giving those people tax abatement. There are people who are house rich, cash poor, if they're living on a fixed income as seniors, but those people would still have the option to defer with 0% interest, so.
Yeah, I
we thought
did,
that was a good
I
option.
did some research from the last work session to this one, and I did find it interesting that at least back in 2009 and 10, there were some reports that certain lenders, if someone was unable to pay taxes and they needed cash, the reverse mortgage type situation, that there were some lenders that would not permit someone to take out a reverse mortgage because there was a lien on the effectively a lien on the property because of property taxes.
Right.
I don't know if that's changed, because underwriting and lending requirements have changed dramatically since 2009, almost to what they were before we went into the recession. So I don't know if that's still the case, but I thought that was interesting, that it may preclude somebody from qualifying
Right. From
for a
doing a
reverse mortgage
deferral.
if they've taken
Right.
advantage of this.
Right.
So one other question I have about the 125%. So we say single-family residences, 125% of single-family residences. Is that a blend on the average of single-family homes that are both detached and not detached, meaning?
Yes, so
Okay.
it would be detached single-family homes, townhomes, and condominiums. And that, we talked to Ryan about it today, our assessor, and he said that's a state reporting standard to use that single-family residences. That's what it includes in that class.
That does not include condos?
It does include
It does
condos.
include condos. So
Condos,
condos,
townhomes, and
townhomes.
single-family detached
Okay.
homes. Yep.
And what was the average for single-family residence? Not the 125, but just the baseline? That we were using?
712, 637, I believe.
Okay.
That was for 2018. So
Okay.
he doesn't have 2019 yet, but he will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I've got a few other questions. Ms. Hardy, then Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. So let me preface by saying that I think for all the reasons we debated back in the budget between kind of the moral, social, and fiscal reasons, I think I absolutely support expanding this program. And I think especially when we talk about consistency with neighbors, last week we talked about our exotic animal ordinance, and I think consistency matters to me a lot. So I think reducing our interest to 0% and changing the brackets so the relief amounts make sense, especially that's where everyone else is. I do share some of the unease, though, not knowing that we can't really cap the program and can't say first come, first serve, and we are changing a lot of levers. Did the committee talk about whether it makes sense to change certain levers so we can kind of test and learn how it goes, monitor the uptake, and then kind of change the other ones if we find that things are within the budgeted amount?
We did. You mean, by levers, do you mean the income brackets?
Well, so we're changing income brackets, we're changing asset limits, we're doing
Right.
the house values,
Right.
the 0% interest. So it's 4 or 5 different things of the program. So it's a pretty radical change. In fact,
Right.
you kind of say the whole program's really been, completely changed, right?
Right.
So would it
Correct.
make sense to change only a couple of those dimensions first, monitor, and then next year kind of go back and change more if we find that we actually have room in the budget to do more?
We did not discuss doing the partial thing. The reason being is that we were looking at, again, what are our neighbors doing versus what we're doing. We like the 0% interest on deferred taxes because it seems like everyone is moving towards that, and that sort of takes away the argument that some seniors or some people might have against deferrals. They say, well, I don't want to pay interest. So you take that interest out, so that was good. We felt pretty strongly about that. And as far as the asset limits go, we were definitely on the low end. I think we were the lowest. As far as we were the highest on the asset limits. We were the lowest on the income brackets. So we wanted to adjust the asset limit to be more in line with our neighbors. We wanted to adjust the income brackets and give a better benefit to our seniors because we were the lowest. And we wanted to take off that dollar cap because that also, we were the only one that did that. So those are the main things that we looked at.
I think as a whole, all those changes make sense, especially when you use that consistency
Yeah.
lens.
Yeah.
Again, the reservation I have is just not knowing what the uptake's going to be. And I think when I look through the many, many pages of spreadsheets where you're kind of assuming
Yeah.
that, I think it's like 43 households currently that either have applied for the program and qualify or just applied and don't qualify. We don't know what the uptake might be, who else out there that could qualify because of these changes.
Right.
And just not
Right.
knowing what the result will be, I think budget-wise, I think gives
Right.
some of us some concern about that.
Right, I understand. Well, even at, if the 100% relief, that only takes the household income up to $37,250. And, I could be wrong, but I just don't think we're going to get a great increase at that income level in the city of Falls Church. I don't think we're going to get a great increase of applicants, but yeah, you're right. We don't know until we actually do it. And if we get more applications and we exceed that amount, then we have to give the benefit because that's
I'd
our
rather
ordinance.
we go incrementally than have to dial back the program and realize, oops, this is going to cost us way more than we can afford this coming year. And so I'd wonder what would make sense to kind of choose 3 out of the 5 things that we're changing, for example, that would give us the most impact and help the most people, and then monitor how a year goes, what the uptake might be, make sure we're within the $390,000 in FY20, and then choose to expand the next lever if we find that uptake isn't, exceeding what we expected.
Right. If we look at the spreadsheet, that first income bracket, the 0 to 40% AMI, and this is assuming that everybody in that, the green area, those last, 6 of them, 7 of them, that's assuming they all qualified for 100% relief, which we know that they don't. I already know that because I looked at it tonight before I came over. That would be $193,000. And, maybe we could play with the other percentages. That 75%, we have no one currently in the 50% category, the 61 to 80% AMI. But we could possibly reduce that second category for the 41 to 60% AMI to 50% relief instead of 75, maybe something like that.
So to summarize, I think all the recommendations from the committee and the task force make sense. So I don't want to question and, change too many percentages, because I think
Okay.
as a whole they make sense. I
Okay.
just wonder, because we are changing, again, across all these different categories, would it be prudent for us to change a handful of them first this year and not change all of them and monitor how it goes, so that we reserve some flexibility, to increase it later on if we need to. Again, it's, I'm sure you guys have studied the 46 people on this spreadsheet really, really closely.
Right,
What I
right.
don't know is, are there households 47 through 80 out there that might take advantage of the program who have a need as well, but we just want to be able to anticipate that for budget reasons. It still might be the right thing to do to take care of, households 47 through 80, but we don't know what the uptake might be until we get there.
So how would you,
That's what was my question is, out of all the different levers that we're changing, are there some that you think are the most impactful that we should definitely do, and some that you're like, hey, we don't need to relax this one as much, and then we could
well,
monitor.
the big one is the income brackets, and that's the one that I thought the committee felt the strongest about, is it, because those are the people in the greatest need, especially in that lower income bracket, up to 40% AMI. And that's where most of your, that's where most of the change is going to come in this ordinance. And everything else is sort of restricting, the.
House values make sense.
Right, the house value, the, deferral option, take the 0% deferral. That actually, especially if we go up to 100% AMI for deferral only, that could impact us, because, that goes up to $117,000 a year. What if those people come forward and say, yes, I want to take advantage of the program and I want to defer?
Yeah. On the asset limit, I saw that we were at 540, and I think the recommendation from the task force is to go to 400. I noticed a handful of jurisdictions, like Fairfax, for example, has it at 340, so
Right.
slightly more restrictive. But did we just choose 400 because that's what another neighbor did?
Well,
or-
we talked about Fairfax and their 340. They also have a lot of mobile homes. They have a mobile home park, or maybe even two, I'm not sure. And they said that's one reason, because a lot of their lower income people live in a mobile home park, and those are assessed much lower. So that was one reason why their assessed value, their asset limits were lower.
So that doesn't count towards their primary residence if they're in a mobile home.
Well, right, but for their assets are also lower because of that. So that was why they were so low, and they were sort of the outlier in that. Everybody else was around 400 to 425, I think.
I'll let other people kind of chime in before I continue. Thank you.
Sure.
I
Vice
just
Mayor Conley
want
wants to
to
go ahead.
amplify something that Jody just said. As you're talking about taking different, if we adjusted it, I think as the committee looked at it, and we kind of trimmed a little here and trimmed a little here and trimmed a little here and trimmed a little here, so it all sort of works together in a different way, or we added a little here. So if you took one piece off, like got rid of the asset limit, that would affect the number of people who fit in a certain category. If we kept it at 540, then there would be more people that qualified for one of these categories. So it was sort of a balancing act of, if we move this one a little bit, let's change the 0 to 40% AMI and give them full relief. But let's also take a look at what their asset limit is, and does that pop somebody into a different category? So it was a really specific going through, and how do we, and Nikki seems to know almost every person in the program, and the people who have applied and been rejected in the past too.
Right.
And they would also be part of that bigger pot of who might come in, is the people who have applied and been rejected. But the reasons they've been rejected don't fit into really any of the things that we're making more robust, correct?
Correct.
Anyway, it just seems like it's, all these different elements are sort of a piece. So if you take one out, it will affect the way different people land in different categories. But again, it doesn't tell us who the new people are who might apply.
I think, again, from a policy perspective, we want to help more people, right? Like, that's the intent of this. We want to help more people who are in need, and this is our vulnerable population that we want to be able to keep in Falls Church and age in place. So absolutely, hopefully there are going to be people who are number 47 through 80, or however many more people out there. But from a pure budget perspective, we want to be able to anticipate that. And so I think that's just the reservation. I think from a pure moral perspective and social perspective, we absolutely want to help more people, and we want to help the people on the list with more, deferral and abatement or whatever the program is. But I think trying to figure out and anticipate what the budget impact is the slight heartburn I have.
Right.
So,
Can I ask another budget question? So just in terms of timing for the application, because I saw this is a July 1, 2019, in effect, change that we're considering, right?
Right, correct.
In terms of the timing of budgeting for potential relief and the impact to the budget, when people apply for this, at what point throughout the year can they apply, and how do we account for that in the budget?
Well, we're looking at their tax returns and all their information as of December 31 of the preceding year.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, this June installment that we just finished, the June tax relief installment, they applied by April 15th. We hope they applied by April 15th. Some of them were a little late. We had to call them. And then we had enough time between April 15th and the mailing of the bills around the 1st of May to get everything in the system, look at them all, get them approved, get them in the system. So, but it was tight. So that was what, 2-week period or whatever. So we'd have to turn around for this December installment, which would be the first installment in FY20, which is, what we're talking about. We would have to, we're going to mail the bills around the 1st of November. So we would have to get people to reapply. So we'd have to get all that information out there, advertise it, get them to reapply for this year. Well, actually, the people who've already applied, we wouldn't have to get them to reapply because we have their information as of December 31 of last year. It would be the new people, if any.
So I'm just thinking about 2021, 2022, the timing of applications. I mean, you can effectively apply
We
at
could
any point in
extend-
the year,
Yeah, we could
correct?
extend that due date from April 15th to,
Okay.
you know,
I mean, so it's
July
conceivable
15th or
that you have, after a budget's been approved, a number of folks come and apply that take us beyond the original budgeted amount, but we wouldn't have known because they can apply whenever. Is that right?
well, we want to give them a deadline, but we're pretty loose on the deadline because they forget, some of them, have dementia problems. They don't get the application in the mail or they lose it or something like that. So we're pretty loose on the deadline, but we do want to give them a deadline. And I think we would stick with the April 15 deadline. I mean, we talked about this if we, make this change.
Before a budget's finalized for that particular.
Well, we could make
following
it,
year.
it would be, we'd want that. We want to have it before the budget's
Yeah, I don't
finalized.
expect for there to be a flood of individuals out there that we didn't know about. That's not what I'm
Right.
concerned about. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about putting something in effect, it's in place, and then 5 years from now, we find out, a lot more folks that have moved in or need to take advantage of this, and we haven't appropriately accounted for it.
Right,
Um,
right.
Okay.
We would keep that deadline April 15th, and you're right, that would help us, then we would know by budget time.
Okay,
Go
and
for it.
then in terms of this particular ordinance change, if we find out through budgeting a year, 2 years from now that we haven't appropriately formulated this correctly, that there's more of an impact to the budget than we thought, what do we do? Do we have to come back and either dial it back or find more money? Is that the answer?
Those would be the two options.
Okay. Would it be prudent for us to put a provision in here that requires us to formally review this ordinance every 24 months or 36 months or 12 months?
Yeah, we can do that. I think it'd be a good idea.
So we have a lead time going into the budget because as it's been made abundantly clear, and we've all experienced in some cases, people are scratching each other's eyes out over $125,000. And
Right.
being able to plan ahead and at least having that conversation would make me feel much better that if folks are fighting over $125,000 and then we find out that we've got more of an impact here, knowing earlier, then better would be helpful.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's something that we write into the ordinance or how we manage that administratively. Thoughts on
What do you think?
how do we deal with other ordinances that impact the budget that require us to review?
Just timeline-wise, we'll have a good sense of the trend with the first payment in December although we'll not have the second payment information quite in time for the budget approval, because it's April 15th, it's very close to budget adoption. But with the December payment, we'd have a very good idea how many households we
Right.
are, because it's 2 payments of the same year, right? Same property. But if there are a lot of aberrations in the second payment, those get adjusted in the year end, which shows up, and then not a way to affect the next year's budget. But I don't think it's going to be very different than the first payment,
Okay.
what we expect in the second.
Yeah, my only request, I'm pleased to see the additional provision there, because that, again, alleviated some of the concerns I had as it relates to home value. I would just ask, just because we're a little unclear in terms of the total potential impact, I don't think that it's going to be a waterfall situation we're talking about, where we've got more of a burden than we otherwise thought. But I would ask that we would put something in the ordinance that would require us to review this. Maybe it's 12 months isn't enough. Maybe it needs to be 24 months. But what I don't want to happen is, because there is, it's a rolling application, and how that may impact budget conversations, and not really knowing that, I don't want to be having to have a discussion about changing an ordinance to preserve or to prevent having to pull money from one place or another right in the middle of budget season. Because if those projections do come in, and we have not been monitoring this, and again, maybe it's only 50,000, maybe it's 25,000, it's a small enough budget to where that makes a difference. And if we've got to have that conversation about changing an ordinance that we just put in place, is not going to be something that's frankly is palatable for me. So I would just ask that we have a formal review of this ordinance in some specified period of time, and I would leave it up to you guys as to when that is, because I just do not want to have a conversation about taking tax relief away from folks that need it right after we passed it, because we weren't sure of exactly what the impact was going to be.
Right.
It's
And
part-
Kieran's right about the December installment. So they only actually formally go through the full application process every 3 years. So we would have them do it, before this December installment. And at that point, since we're moving to the fiscal year tax relief to align with the billing, when we know the December installment, we're going to know what the June installment is.
Right.
So we'll know long before the budget process of next year, if we have a problem. And so then from that point on, for the next 3 years, it would just be new people coming in. Those are the people that would actually be applying them by April 15th. Everyone else just does it like a recertification, we call it, and they sign a form saying that nothing's changed. They're still the primary, homeowner, blah, 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 blah. That's still their primary residence. So yeah, we would know long before the budget of next year.
And the appropriation versus the actual gets visited every year as part of the budget. So even now, I know that for the last 2 years, I can speak for it, that we have not overshot our appropriation for the deferral program. We do review it as part of the budget development every year when we do it. Whether you put it in the policy or not, we're definitely going to be reviewing it. And then if we see this year that we're far ahead of what we budgeted for, it's going to have to be accounted for in the next year's budget.
Yeah, but my point is, that's an appropriation. That's a moving around of money. That's not a
Yeah,
review
or-
of the calculations or the ordinance itself. So, I mean, anytime we move money around, whether it's appropriated or not, requires some heartburn from folks. So, again, my request is that if we're not completely dialed in, we at least write into this ordinance that we have a formal review. And if it's 3 years, I'm fine with that, if you think that's what it's going to take. But I would feel much more comfortable going forward if we had just a specific time period. And if at some point we decide to remove that from the ordinance because we've got it dialed in, but it's not a place I want to be about having to move money around because we weren't sure of the impact. And maybe I'm being overly cautious, but that's my request for this. It would make me feel much more comfortable if we just had a provision for a review in a specified amount of time, as opposed to a review on where the money comes from, but actually reviewing the levers, as folks have mentioned.
You actually have that in the ordinance, Mr. Shields? I don't recall typically seeing review provisions in ordinance.
There have been times in the past where the council has made a policy change and they've put in the ordinance, the city manager is hereby directed to provide a report to the city council within 12 months on the results of this policy change. And so something, we could come up with similar language. I can recall 2 or 3 instances where that's been done in the past. I think the point here is if this were done, the council would get the information before it's the thick of the budget process, more like in the November budget briefing, so that you have time to provide direction about how to handle it before all the drama of the budget starts.
All right, what other comments do we have? Mr. Duncan, do you have something?
Yes, thank you. It sounds like things are coming along nicely, and hopefully we can get to the point where we can all support this. I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. On line 123, the strike-through of the language that says, "and that of the owner's relatives living in the dwelling," could you, my interest in this is in encouraging situations where eligible elderly who are perhaps struggling to stay at home on their own might be able to bring in a son or a granddaughter or a relative to help them age in place. That would help make this program truly beneficial for, all generations, and strike a blow for affordability to some degree too. Is that language struck through in order to enable that? In other words, if I am moving in with grandma and I have a job, and the income from my job and maybe my assets are going to not count against grandma, then she remains eligible for this program. Am I reading that right, or is that not what we're trying to do?
Well, we struck it here on 123 because if you look over on lines like 152 to 156, we do allow a $10,000 exemption on income of any relative living in the home, with the homeowner. So it was just sort of redundant to have it at 123.
I see. I'm sorry, I read through the whole thing, but I skipped. I had a hunch that there was probably some other place that this was brought up. So
Right, so line
speak to that. So
154.
you're considering what I'm saying, but
Yes.
you're limiting that income to $10,000. Is that a
Yeah.
realistic number? I
We're limiting the exclusion of their income. So they can exclude $10,000 of their income if they're living with their, mother or father, whatever, their parent to take care of them. So their income would still count towards that household income, but they're allowed to exclude $10,000
And
because
where-
they're there, taking care
Where
of
does
them.
the $10,000 number come from?
Pardon me?
Where does the $10,000 number come from? I mean, could that be,
It came from a previous ordinance.
so,
That's, and that was pretty standard too across the board for our neighbors.
so if, to achieve what I am hoping to achieve, you would have to increase the exclusion to a more meaningful number? Is that what I'm wanting? I mean, if you've got a $10,000 number that was in a previous ordinance, it's an old
Well,
number.
And it's also, that's what our neighbors allowed to for the exclusion.
In other jurisdictions, the competitive
10,000. number
number is 10,000. Okay, well, that's too bad, because that's not really going to achieve what I'd hoped to achieve.
We have a couple of families where they have their adult child living with them, and they have qualified, so.
Mhm. With the adult child working?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I defer to your extensive knowledge, as others have said, about the people who are eligible. I feel pretty comfortable that the program will not exceed its budget, but if it does, it wouldn't be imprudent to have some sort of a look back that others have suggested. The 125% cap seems like a great idea, because anybody who's sitting on a house is worth $900,000 needs to be in a discussion about moving out of that house and finding a smaller place. Even in Falls Church, you might be able to find a place that you could afford that would be easier to maintain. There are situations like that that we know about. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
All right, Mr. Z.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I think if we're going to embark on a discussion of a change in our policy or enhancement of our policy to bring in different kinds of demographics into our city, we're going to have a conversation ultimately about living wages and affordable housing for moderate income people and a whole variety of things that this is part of something that we can do that's fairly advanced at this point. And for the most part, I would say for nearly all of it, from my observation, while campaigning, knocking on each and every door, not as much as the mayor, of course, but as much as I could do, that I've heard from them. And what struck me was people that were not completely struggling, because people that are struggling tend to not answer the door at all. With the newspapers that are masking tape to their doorways and their windows and tattered blinds, you know, you can knock until your knuckles are raw, they're not gonna answer the door. No, it's those that come willingly say that if it weren't for that slight advantage that I get from having either a deferral or abatement, I wouldn't be here. Live in a 6-bedroom, 4-bath house, and yeah, I know it's seems like a lot, but if I go, then, you know, you're gonna have other people moving behind me. So I said, you know, you're kind of people I want to stay here. I really want to thank the task force for looking at this for such a long period of time. I think I started nearly a year ago, and I don't know what Vice Mayor was doing with the hands, but it seems to me that if you're kneading bread, it's about time to put this in the oven and get it baked and get out. And then the last point, with respect to certain provisions here, I think it's kind of equitable. I do hear the the fear that it's going to be a runaway train with lots of boxcars and lots of people hanging on to it. So that just like the water investment fund for retirement, that we can you know, put this up, write this in there. It'll be a matter of regular reporting to council. And I think the city manager has agreed to that. Lastly, with regard to keeping relatives or children or others in the house, let me just say I remember 3 households in particular where there was the son, and in one case a nephew, and they were bragging to me how they were living in a tax-deferred house, and they'd move their parents out, and it was free housing for them, and they were getting ready to flip it. So, you know, mom, dad's gone, it's free to me, I'm working on flipping this. And so, on one hand, you might think that, well, you know, you've got this image of someone hanging out and taking care of the parents. I mean, the reality is, that's not what happens. So,
Now, that is a grim assessment of human nature.
you know, 10K, I'd be,
Well, in that situation, they would not be.
I'd like to reduce that to 0.
They wouldn't be allowed.
Zero.
They wouldn't be allowed the deferral, right? I mean, if
0
Right,
out.
they-
Thank
It'd
you.
be nephews
the
or they-
homeowner has to be living there,
Yeah.
yes.
I know-
It has
I
to
know
be
where
their
those houses
primary
are.
yeah,
residence.
exactly. Dan, you've just
let us
found some
know.
money for us. It sounds like.
Yeah,
so.
that's your 30K that we're over.
That'll pay for the exotic animals ordinance.
All right, I think we've probably talked this thing to death. Yeah, let's talk it some more. All right, Vice Mayor Conley.
Jody, on line 156,
Mhm.
it says the net combined financial worth of the owners as of December 31st. And then if I refer back here to 119,
Mhm.
it's all the assets of the owners and that of the spouse of any owner who resides therein. Right? So that's-
119, is that what you said?
Yeah. The definition of what net combined financial worth is.
Right. Assets of the owners of the dwelling.
So that doesn't include the children, or
Right.
the nephew, or the boyfriend.
Right. So the $10,000 is an income exclusion. So the assets are the homeowners.
Right. So,
Tell me again about the
Is that-
application. I gotta check with Nikki
yeah,
first. 159?
okay.
Oh, okay, the net combined of the owners, blah, blah, blah. Yes. We look at the income of anyone living in the house,
All household income.
but not the assets. The assets are is only the homeowners, is that correct?
I had a recent application.
And I asked for the income and assets for everyone living in the home.
And the assets as well?
Yes.
Because the ordinance doesn't really address the assets. It's defines it as only the net combined financial worth of the owners. It doesn't talk about people living in a home.
I like that.
You like that?
Can I ask you a question? This raises an interesting point, though. How do you verify who's living in a house?
Well, we get to know these people pretty well. And sometimes they'll volunteer who's living in the home. We also look at personal property records, because if they're living in the home, they most likely have a car. So we're looking for other, like personal property tax bills at that address. How else do we? That's one of the primary ways we do it.
We also rely on personal knowledge of knowing our constituency. So in this recent case, they were disqualified because she submitted her application on her own personal income and assets, but I have personal knowledge that her son is living with her. So I researched in Clear to find, it's a skip tracing software, to find known addresses for the son. So we use every tool that we have available to us. We can look in ERMS and see where they, what address they used for their Virginia tax return. And we do our due diligence to verify the information.
Okay.
We're
That makes me
pretty
feel better.
good detectives, so.
It's like a cold case.
Yeah,
pursuit. Okay.
pretty
All right.
thorough.
That's reassuring.
Unless there's anything else, why don't we wrap? There's something
I'm
else.
not going to prolong the discussion tonight. I've expressed my preference previously as a matter of public policy. I believe deferral's better. I don't want to prolong the discussion tonight. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think we had a good discussion about this. We thank you for all the great work you've done over many, many months, and to you as well, Vice Mayor, and for the task force as a whole. So anyway, thank you. I think we've had a very thorough
Okay.
and proper discussion of this, and I guess it'll come up for first reading.
And when it comes back to you, we'll have a sentence in there directing the city manager to provide a report in November on the impacts. Now, this November, we won't have any data, but then thereafter, we'll do it as part of the budget prep. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all for
Thanks.
coming out tonight.
Mr. Mayor, just a couple other quick questions. Will it be assumed that the relief, whatever it is, be for a year? So that if the city council were to change the ordinance, it's not an entitlement, as the city manager referred to it a minute. Is it clear that that entitlement is subject to the continuation of the law?
Yes.
I see it. Is that
Yeah, the council can change the policy and change the,
right? But is it clear, it ought to be made clear to the applicants, really, really clear up front, so that there's no sense that if, for example, we've overrun the budget by more than was expected, that the entitlement would continue if the city council decides that it wants to change the program.
Yeah, we can do that. The application, when they apply, it's good for that year. So, but we can, when we start, if we roll this thing out, that's certainly something that we can communicate.
The next
For the
question is,
applicants.
if there are grandchildren living in the residence, does the city have the obligation to provide schooling for them? The
yes,
answer is yes.
if that is their legal residence, yes.
So it would be possible to have someone with a total deferment, not deferment, total exemption, and at the same time have several school children that would cost the city an additional $18,000 to $19,000 per year per student. That's a possible scenario.
It's possible. I would think that the parent would live there as well, in which case their income would come into play.
Necessarily.
Well, yeah, it doesn't have to be, you're right.
Well, it's like we're not going to stop beating this horse anytime soon here. I would ask that when you honor Councilmember Schneider's comment, that you make it something that sounds like subject to availability of appropriations and funds as opposed to subject to the whims of council. Thank you.
All right, anything else? What? All right, I think that's been a good discussion, and I think it's over. Let's move on to the next item. Thank you all for coming out this evening. Appreciate it. Mr. Shields.
So the next items we'll take together. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Jody. And Shana Schaefer will be our lead staffer for the 2 chapters of the comprehensive plan, and the two can really kind of flow together. So I might invite Nancy, and I don't know if Dana is here as well, but Nancy Vincent to the table as well. So the first is an update to the demographics chapter, which we're calling the People, Housing, and Jobs chapter of the comprehensive plan. And then we'll transition from there into the housing. For both of these chapters, we want to just touch on the changes. We're not going to go through the presentation that we went through the first time. Just go through the changes, but also try to hone in then on what are the strategies and the goals that are at the end of the chapter. We anticipate that probably is going to be where the council most wants to weigh in. The request of the council is we would like this to be the last work session on these 2 chapters. Get your input on them and then take it to the Planning Commission so that the Planning Commission can act with your input already in, and then when it comes back to you, it's a finished product. If there are changes later in the process, we'll need to send it back a second time to the Planning Commission. So the hope is tonight to get a good thorough dive on where the council wants to point this ship in terms of the text that's before you, so we don't have to do that repeat to the Planning Commission, if that makes sense. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Ms. Schaefer.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Tarter, members of council. We're happy to be here tonight to give an update of where the city staff is in updating these 2 chapters. And so first, just a brief update on what's taken place with the demographics chapter since the May 20th work session. Staff launched a community survey, which ran from May 29th through June 10th, and there are a few key takeaways from that survey. First, respondents were least surprised by city's aging population and the fact that city residents are employed in high-paying jobs. They were most surprised in the decline of number of households with children, the rise in the number of single-person households, and the recent surge in household earnings in that $50,000 to $100,000 range. In addition to that, the survey also asked what the city should be focusing on in terms of this data that was presented, and the number one thing that respondents mentioned was to focus on housing, so that ties in well with the housing chapter that we are also updating. City staff also organized a June 8th community meeting, and in general, the same feedback was heard through the survey. So as was mentioned, this is intended to be the last work session tonight with council, and from there, we'll be looking to refine the chapter with council feedback, remaining board and commission feedback. They have up until June 20th to give written comments. And then from there, we'll be moving to a work session with the Planning Commission on July 1st, tentative action with the Planning Commission on July 15th, and then coming back to council on July 22nd. So just want to highlight a few of the changes that have occurred to the demographics chapter before we open it up to further discussion. In the demographic trends section on page 6, a chart and some text was added to highlight the city's long-term trends in household income. This is something that the consultant had pulled together recently, and so in looking at the short-term trends, there's been a surge in that $50,000 to $100,000 range, but that's something that's been noted more in the recent years. In looking at the city's long-term trends back to 2000, the real increase that the city's been noticing has been in that $150,000 plus range. So looking at long-term trends as well as some of the short-term trends, that was one of the changes added to the chapter. And then in the connection and strategy section, just a couple more changes. Some direct references were added to better knit this chapter with the other chapters of the comprehensive plan. There was a little bit more emphasis placed on the fact that there will continue to be natural changes in the city's demographics despite any changes in development. And then finally, there was a map that was added to look at how changes in the city's population can connect to transportation, looking at one of the strengths of the city is that it is a smaller city, so how can the city promote using other modes of transportation? And so that map kind of highlights all the spots that are within a half mile of some of the newer planned developments. And so that can tie into the transportation chapter, how the city can promote multiple modes of transportation rather than everybody using their car. Maybe they can walk or bike or use other forms to get around the city. And so that's pretty much all the changes that I wanted to highlight. So with that, we can open it up for discussion.
All right, thank you for your fine work. We greatly appreciate it. And let's open it up to conversation and discussion. Does anyone have any comments they would like to make? Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. I really like the updates, especially I wanted to point out for both the public and council, if we can bring up the demographics chapter, page 6. So it's that additional detail you talked about. I think the headline we've been talking about is the incomes between 50,000 to 100,000 has really surged, but I think this chart is just really telling. So you actually see the biggest surge is actually the 200,000 and up. That's a big purple bar that we have up there. So not only are we getting more people making more than 6 figures, but we have a community of 1%ers essentially, right? So when we talk about wanting to be that community for all generations, if you just look at that, the purple bar versus the gray bars of where we're decreasing, where we're losing everybody kind of below 100,000 and gaining a lot of people who make even more than $200,000. So I think that's pretty stark. That I actually think is the headline more than the 50 to 100,000 because that big difference we see.
All right, thank you very much. Other comments or questions? Vice Mayor Conley.
I have a view. Thanks a lot, Ms. Schaefer, for these changes. I feel like we've talked about this one a number of times, or I've been in a lot of meetings as we've talked about it. So one of the things as I look through here, it seems like some places, and this is actually both chapters as I read them, some places we talk about 2006 to 2015, sometimes it's through 2016, sometimes it's through 2017, and there doesn't really seem to be a clear baseline of those things. Is that because we're pulling from different places? Why is that?
It would depend on where the data is coming from. If you wanted specifics of where the data is coming from, I could check with Lisa Sternevent, who did these projections. But it would depend on what's available.
But even just the combined two of them, and some of the charts, like this chart here on page 3 of 19, it goes population from 2010 to 2017. But then there's another chart someplace else that is 2000 to 2016. So it's hard to, it seems like we need to have a little more consistency in some of those numbers. And if they're coming from different surveys or different places, that makes sense. But as I looked at it, there was one, and I think this was in housing, where we're looking at the increase in rental units, but that stops at 2015. But actually, we opened up 500 rental units in 2016. So that changes the way that chart should look. So there's just a couple places where it doesn't seem as consistent. And then I have a lot of little nitpicky things I don't really want to talk about here, but I'll send to you separately. One of the things, and the Chamber of Commerce brought this up in their letter, the income where the people who live in the city of Falls Church are 1%ers, but the people who work in the city of Falls Church have a much more moderate income. Is this a place for us to say, we want to change that, we want to flip that, we want to bring in more Class A office space so that we have more high-income paying jobs in the city? Does that belong in the demographic chapter? As a strategy? Because it seems like something we want to do. We keep asking for Class A office buildings in our development. If we're able to do that, then that changes that proportion better so that it is more, not better, but it's more balanced as opposed to having such a huge disparity. And then
just to follow up on that, I mean, to what degree, well, like the circle map that you've got there implies that, we want to do more development that will be within a half a mile. I mean, is the point of this chapter to show things the way they are only, or to imagine things as they might be? Because if it is, then what the Vice Mayor has said is appropriate. And I appreciate the circle map being in there, and I'm just assuming that people get it, that, you know, we're trying to create more places that are within a half mile, but if that needs to be made explicit, please do so.
That point, so we did get that comment from the chamber. It's noted in the staff report, but it is not factored into the strategies. And so that, I think that's the type of input that we're looking for in this session. I think because the demographics is really focused on, it is people, jobs, and housing, and jobs is part of what the chapter is. So I think it fits.
And then there's another part where we're talking about the increase in number of households without children, the increase in one-bedroom or one-person families, and that's in both the demographics and the housing chapter. But that is like the direct result of the policies that we've had for the last 10 years to build smaller units. So we've been shaping that policy, and I feel like we need to sort of acknowledge that a little bit more, that it's not just accidental that there are one-person households, but it's because of the policy change that we've made that we have more rentals and we have more one-person households than in the past. And if there are other policy changes we can make to affect other things, like bringing in more Class A office would bring in better jobs. And then my last question is page 14. You're talking about public facilities and transportation, and I'm wondering if there's place in there for anything about public safety. Should that be in the public facilities discussion? Because it doesn't seem like that's mentioned anywhere. And again, I'm not quite sure if it actually belongs in this chapter or not, but it seems like an issue as we talk about public facilities and the increase in population and the need for more facilities, also the need for more police officers, fire, safety. So would that fit in public facilities?
So we could certainly add that on, public facilities and services. The focus of this section of the chapter is really to begin thinking about how the city looks at this data and then starts thinking about how city services and will change. But talking specifically about the actions that would go into the public facilities and services chapter, there's another chapter. So it's kind of looking at some of the connections here, but then talking about them further and going into more detail in later chapters of the comp plan.
So maybe a reference then in here to what we're saying about public safety, because I think the change in demographics really does affect the needs that the city will have in that area.
We weren't sure. We weren't sure. You look very pensive.
I'll talk for a while, and you'll come up with a couple other things.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. That's fine. Mr. Duncan, do you have something? You have
Just
that book?
keep thinking, Mary Beth. Stop me if what I'm asking for is already in here. I wonder if there's information that sort of puts Falls Church in the Virginia context. I know there's been some, publicity about we're the fastest growing, bestest ever place on the planet, and I just, I'm not sure I see that jumping out here. I mean, for instance, where are we among the 38 independent cities from Alexandria to Winchester? Where do we rank in population in the Commonwealth? That would be something I would be interested to know.
So some of that information is included in the trends report that was done,
Mhm.
but it's not specifically in the chapter.
Is this a place where that info could be dropped in without it being obtrusive?
What data specifically in comparing?
Where we're, in terms of population, where we rank,
Mhm.
in Virginia among the 38 independent cities, population-wise and rate of growth over whatever time frame that we've got data on. Just thinking, when we get the census data here in a couple of years, we're going to want to redo all this, and that would be one thing that would be particularly interesting to know over the last 10 years. Where did Falls Church move from X to X plus among the 38 independent cities in the state, and population and growth rate too, for that matter. And I'm just personally curious to know how many counties in the state actually have fewer people than the city of Falls Church. Looking at some of the charts and the housing data, you could sort of begin to suss it out, but I didn't have time to do it. And you guys would probably have that information. Well, Cooper would have that right off the bat. Okay, I've filled enough time. You figure each other.
No, I'm done.
Well, I gotta say, you're making a fashion statement, those double glasses, I like it. All right, who else has got, Ms. Hardy?
I had a broader question. I was curious from our demographer whether there was an assessment of whether our, I guess, demographics across both age, income, diversity, whether it's kind of balanced and sustainable. I know that there are a lot of implications at the end of, well, based on, where our projections are going, here's implications for police or parks, public facilities, transportation, housing. But is there an assessment of, is the way our population growing, both in terms of the makeup of all those different dimensions, is it sustainable? Because I think, as the Vice Mayor mentioned, we had intentionally welcomed more single-person households to the city 10 years ago, and that was a deliberate policy choice. Are there implications based on where these demographics are heading, where we make similar policy choices, where we need to do a better job, for example, having seniors age in place? Like if we think that we need to do a better job of that, because that's where the boomer population is going. I'm just curious whether we got that assessment from kind of a third party that says, well, based on where you guys are going, you need to do X, Y, and Z beyond the public facilities planning. Did she give us that sort of assessment of how healthy, I guess, is the makeup of our demographics?
I'm not sure that she did, but I can certainly check in with her and get that feedback.
Okay, are there other comments? You had one more, didn't you, Vice Mayor Conley?
I just have one more question, really. Yeah, I know. See, I'm not really done. Just with the survey. So as I read the survey and you were just talking about it, and the question was, were you surprised by this? Were you surprised by this? Were you surprised? I'm just wondering, was that the whole survey? Was like, why do we care if people are surprised? Is like, what, I thought the survey was going to be more of, what do you want to see happening in the city? But what is the word surprise was surprising to me as an official survey instrument.
So as we were pulling together the survey, staff thought it was important to get an understanding of what this population thinks about the demographics. There's been some misconceptions about where, for example, school-age children are coming from. So trying to get an understanding about what the public thinks and then being able to frame discussions in that way.
So were you satisfied with the number of responses you got? It seems like it's under 100 responses. In a statistically significant world, is that enough responses? Or is it?
No, definitely not. And these polls are not statistically significant because they are not done according to those techniques. It's not, we didn't call anybody, instead it was self-selecting people who chose to take time to fill out a survey. It's another form of input similar to the people who choose to show up at a town hall meeting. But you have to reserve some judgment about how much you can learn from it.
Okay, are there any other, Mr.
Yep.
Lichtenhouse?
So the demographic report, I was just looking through here, the households that make up all that is interesting to me. It looks like everything that we have only goes through 2016. Is that correct? I mean, I know we've got some projections, but we don't have anything beyond year-end 16. Do you have any updates to that?
So I think a lot of the data that Lisa Sturdivant uses is the census data. So that data set went through 2016. We have lots of other data sets that have more recent information, but for some of the things that she specifically was looking at, she chose to use that data set. So are there some specific things that you wanted to have updated?
Yeah, I remember when Lisa was here and she was presenting on number of households with children. I know there's a decline in here of, I think it was 5%, something like that, from 2011 to 2016. One, I was surprised by that, but then again, maybe you're biased by what you're around and what you see. Maybe that is the case. I was just curious to know what's transpired over the last 2.5 years and how that comports with, some of the Weldon Cooper studies and the trends that we've seen in kids in the school system. And it was flat last year, so maybe that is the case. I'm just curious to know what's happened over the last 2.5 years, but I understand that you can only do what you can do with the data that you have available. So I was just curious to know if we had any more up-to-date data as it relates to, whether it's income, number of households with children, the makeup, that type of thing. I'm a guy I like numbers, and so this is the illustrations. Maybe it's the pictures that I really like, but the data is interesting to me. So I'm just curious to know what's transpired over the last 2.5 years since we've used that census data. Nancy, do we have anything around that from a household perspective that you guys collect?
So the kinds of information that we collect in Housing and Human Services are the rents.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that the average rent has gone up in the rent per type of unit. We can get from assessments, housing costs.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a specific data set that you're looking for that I can?
No, it's fine. I was just looking for more up-to-date. If we had data on, any of the analytics that are in here, anything that's more up-to-date than year in 2016, as we're looking
So
at
those
this.
things we do have more up to date. The school pupil generation, that's up to date. It's the income particularly that we have to rely on the census from. We don't have that data.
Okay. And are her numbers specific to the zip codes here in the city of Falls Church? Because I see a lot of studies that are done where they say Falls Church, and sometimes they're reaching over into Arlington, sometimes they're picking up McLean, sometimes they're picking up, places a mile outside of the city of Falls Church. So does her data look specifically at the zip
Yeah, they're
codes inside
using
the
the
city
census
limits?
tracts that are specific to the maps that were used in 2010. And, but they're using, a lot of the times, they're using some algorithms and things that are, PhDs put together, whereas our projections, we oftentimes disagree with the census. In fact, the census has projections for 2008 that I think, like Gary Fuller and the planners, don't think is the accurate number. We'll find out in 2020, but that's always the case. Sort of our local understanding of what's happening is going to be different from what the black box is producing.
Sure.
of the US Census.
It's more of how the general census numbers kind of comport with what we have from a local perspective, whether it's households, children, income, that type of thing. So you have an apples to apples comparison. Sounds like it's
So
could be a
that's
little
why
fuzzy.
she had like that 2006 cutoff for anything that has to do with race or ethnicity or income levels. Our source is the census. When we have some of the more local things that we do track, we can get more up to date and more granular.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Schaefer. Thanks.
Mr. Z, did you have something?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Perhaps he will after I speak.
Are you speaking again?
I apparently am. yes.
Okay.
Apparently he is.
All right.
Despite all hopes. Well, the Vice Mayor and I were just looking at page 13 of 19, and I think Mr. Z actually called this to our attention at the last meeting. Under housing affordability, I'm pretty sure I have no idea what that sentence means. I'm not even sure it's a sentence, first. And second, if it wants to say that nearly 3/4 of the current households in the city of Falls Church have incomes at or above the median for the Washington, D.C. region, which is true, then, only 55% of future housing needs in the city will be for households in this higher income range is, again, not really a sentence. But second is something that just can't be. I mean, we're not going to have the highest incomes in the galaxy and not provide housing for them. I mean, how could that work going forward? So this goes to the Vice Mayor's question about, does this chapter's purpose include saying, we're going to do something about that, or we're not going to do something about it because we don't want so many people with higher income? I don't know, but what's there now can't be the way it's going to be. Didn't you bring this up at our last meeting?
Is that a sentence?
Well, I did, but I think I was using complete sentences.
Yes, well, as you can see, I'm trying to,
I don't understand
Do you,
Did the sentence or Phil?
yeah, well, the part about me I can understand, but look at the words of the sentence and tell me, Letty, what do you think? What does it say?
So ignoring the sentence, the data makes sense to me, right? So the light purple is where we currently are, the breakdown of households and their income. In the future, dark purple, that's what it's going to look like. the future looks pretty different than what we currently have. You're not going to say you're not going to get rid of those upper income types of housing, but you're going to have a lot more demand for other types that we currently don't have. I don't like the two bar charts next together because I think use bar charts like that together for certain types of data. I don't think this is one of those types of situations. Also ignoring the sentence, but the data itself makes sense to me. If that helps.
Okay, so does Mr. Litgenhouse have any?
In the future, 55% of the people who want to live in Falls Church or will live in Falls Church will be in that upper income bracket. Is that right, Shanna?
That's correct. So this is based on projected changes in the household incomes of people wanting to move into the city.
People wanting to move into the city, but how are they going to move in if they don't have the income? I mean, just look at the way life is, right? I mean, we would have to do something really dramatic in order to make a housing supply available for all the people who wanted to move in that category.
Right, and so that was the purpose of this connection, was to begin to think, how does the city need to start planning in terms of its housing stock to accommodate changes in incomes of households within the region?
Just, if that's what you're trying to say, it just seems like a backwards way to say it. I mean, does anybody have any feelings about that?
The reality is if we do nothing, the dark purple chart won't look like that, right? Because the housing stock will look like the light purple chart
Yeah,
still.
if we keep at the current
You don't do-
pace,
yes.
we're not aiming to get to where that purple chart is right now. And if we want to aim to do that, that's maybe commendable, but we'd better, A, I'm not sure that those marching orders are clear as expressed here, and B, that sounds like a big discussion about how we're going to create housing affordability at a scope and level that is unprecedented in the city's history.
If you understand that, can you address the point?
Yes,
For the
we can
next slide.
certainly revise that sentence to make it clearer and also emphasize that it's that the city is beginning to think about how it can accommodate future households, not necessarily being that we're going to be able to accommodate for that 55%, but looking at how city's policy can look to diversify the housing stock to be available for a wider range of incomes.
Is that okay with you, Mr. Duncan?
That part sounds good.
Okay. Are there other comments or questions? If not, thank you very much for this portion of our discussion. I think we're going immediately into the next portion, correct? Yes, of course, Vice Mayor Conley.
One more question, sorry, on the timeline. So you're meeting with us today, June 17th. So the changes that we just requested, will we see them again before this goes to the Planning Commission? How does this work timeline-wise?
So that would not be the plan. The plan would be to take the council's input and then go straight to the planning commission and then come back with hopefully your view that they've been satisfactorily addressed.
I thought you wanted to come back a couple of times, didn't you?
You were not listening, because I was listening, which is why I was chewing on the phone, because this is your last shot.
I
at
know, that
this
was a
mo-
joke. That was a joke. He
Oh,
seemed to
you didn't get it?
he seemed to be
Oh.
very adamant about not wanting to do this again.
Did you want a rump session of some kind, maybe on Saturday morning?
The main thing I was trying to avoid was having to do this sort of loop back with the planning commission, because the planning commission does, by Virginia code, have to kind of bless the final language, and if it changes later, it needs to go back to them. That was the point I
Really
was trying to
touchy,
make.
too.
But then how will we know that the changes we just requested are made before it goes to the Planning Commission? It's like, suppose my question about our strategy of bringing more high-paying jobs to the city.
Yeah. Well, we've made a good note of that one, so that I think that's a good one.
Can you circulate a revised draft?
Yeah, how about when the draft goes to the planning commission, we can include the council in that circulation.
That's a good
just so
idea.
you see it.
But
So
you
we
know,
can-
to the vice mayor's point, I'm not necessarily sold on the fact that the solution is more Class A office buildings. I mean, that, it's clearly a strategy that may or may not work in the future going forward, and tied to that, then could preclude other options. I think the emphasis is on jobs. I think that's good. We should do that.
Okay.
And the space to allow for that. I don't know necessarily Class A office buildings is the answer.
All right, why don't we move on to the next chapter? All right, that's all I got. Yeah, go ahead to the next chapter.
So we've done an introduction, and so Ms. Schaefer will just keep going.
Okay. So again, this has been on a similar track as the demographics chapter. We also had launched a survey on May 29th that ran until June 10th. And so just a few key takeaways from that survey. 83% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed with the new vision statement, which has been revised since the May 20th work session. In terms of the three most important strategies, respondents noted that the city should focus on incentivizing more workforce, moderate and low-income housing, supporting aging in place, and reviewing development regulations to allow a wider variety of housing types. And then again, looking at the proposed actions that respondents thought the city should prioritize, the top three were to focus on amending the zoning ordinance to allow more forms of housing, providing tax relief and rent relief for low to moderate income seniors and persons with disabilities, and then updating the zoning ordinance to enable more in-place additions as alternatives to tear downs. In terms of comments at the end of the survey, most of those focused on the need for the city to provide more affordable housing, more workforce housing, and then again, emphasizing the need to support options for folks to age in place. And then again, generally, at the June 8th community meeting, similar feedback was heard. And so just highlighting some of the changes that have occurred to this chapter since the May 20th work session. On page 1, there were 2 introductory paragraphs that were added that emphasize the connection of affordable housing to the local economy. The vision statement has changed. This term small town character has been changed to close-knit community. And in general, we've had positive feedback on that, both in the survey and at some of the more recent board and commission meetings that staff has been to with the chapter. The second sentence of the vision statement has also been revised to note that the city will work proactively to provide affordable housing for a range of incomes, household sizes, generations, and needs. And then with the project policy and action tables, there was an action added to provide local funding for a public-private partnership to preserve existing market rate affordable housing units, such as the Fields or Merrill House. There was also a strategy added to support the Sustainable and Renewable Affordable Housing Fund, a strategy that came out of discussions with the Housing Commission to add a meals tax or general obligation bond as a possible revenue source that might support an affordable housing fund. The layout of the actions table has also been updated to be a little bit more user-friendly, and then the policies, projects, and actions have been reprioritized based upon feedback that staff has received. And so just wanted to highlight a few takeaways from the actions on pages 15 through 18 before we open it up into discussion. I don't want to go through all of these right now, but just one of the things that we wanted to highlight is that based on the way these actions are laid out, there's more focus on preserving existing housing stock in the short term, versus creation of standalone affordable housing development that would be more of a longer-term strategy. There's also the need to identify revenue sources to support some of these actions throughout the public engagement process. Consistently heard from the public and from the boards and commissions that the city needs to provide affordable housing options. So considering how the city wants to do that moving forward, whether it's using grant funds or possibly looking at some of these more innovative strategies, such as an increase in the meals tax or maybe using a revenue bond as a means to do that. And then finally, just wanted to highlight that another one of the main strategies that was brought forth is the need to update the city zoning ordinance to help to diversify the city's housing stock, provide provisions that will support additions versus tear downs, and then also additional evaluation to the city's parking minimums in order to make some of the multifamily developments more cost effective as a means to support affordable housing as well. So that's all that I wanted to highlight, so open it up for discussion.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Let's have some discussion. Who has the first comment? Okay, Ms. Hardy.
Great, thank you. I've been waiting for this for 6 months. When we last talked about the affordable housing policy, Wyatt told me to wait. So here we are. So thank you. I appreciate all the updates and all the hard work that's gone into it because this is really big, I guess, opportunity for us. I do like the revised vision statement. I do think it probably generates less concern. It is aspirational. One just suggestion, I think, in my mind, a good way to sum it up, just like how we have mobility for all modes, I think this is housing for all. It's kind of a simple way that I think aspirationally what we think we want the City of Falls Church to be, kind of for all incomes, all generations, all backgrounds. There's a lot of stuff that we could do, and I know that that's what pages and on are. And I like the categorization of the short, medium, long term. So many good ideas in there. Using that kind of as our gap analysis of, what's our aspiration and vision. If we do all of these things, do we get there? Do we think that we get there? I think that's kind of a question I have, because I think that should inform some of the priority and how we should go about it. Because there's so many good things that we should do in there. And I want to know, if we think that vision is what we want to get to by 2040, if we do all these things, if this is the plan that we lay out, do we achieve that vision by 2040? And then the follow-up question is, can we actually do all of them? Are we staffed appropriately? Do we have the money and the funds to do? And I think that's where the one of the actions is, considering some local or dedicated revenue source. I think those are two of the corollaries in my mind, is if that's the vision where we're going to go and here's all the steps to get us there, do we have the right resources to do it, both in terms of people and the money to achieve it? I don't know whether that needs to be in a comp plan or if that's more of do we then translate this into like a council work plan? But those are the big questions for me, because right now there's so much good stuff in here, but I don't see like the course of action. Okay, so if this is where we want to go and these are all the possible things we should do, what's that kind of next step? And then I'm glad to see the survey results, because that's pretty similar to kind of what I expected. One of the things I wanted to point out, again, for council, I think there's a new chart in the comp plan, is really looking at our current affordable housing stock. I think out of the 200 some units or so, that's a new chart. I remember seeing one of the pages that right there, 244 total units. I really want to make sure that we understand the urgency of the field's expiration in 2026. That is 40% of our affordable housing stock. That's going to expire very soon. And I know that's highlighted as one of the short-term things, but I hope we understand that this is really not like a future thing that we can worry about. Like, preserving 40% of our affordable housing stock is a big deal. Like, that's the equivalent of 3 to 4 projects that we do using the 6 zoning. That takes us 15 years to get there. So preserving the 96 units really needs to be like the number one thing I think this council needs to think about in the coming years, because it takes us probably that many years to do. And to achieve 96 units, like I said, it's going to take 15 years worth of 6% units to get there. So I just want to make sure that that really settles in, because I mentioned this when we did the affordable housing policy. I don't think that's called out as enough of a crisis that we need to be rallying around. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to go? Who would like to go next? Vice Mayor Connolly, would you like to go? Okay.
So, like Ms. Hardy, I've also been waiting 6 months for this, because I was on that affordable housing or affordable living policy work group. And I've sat in a few meetings on this one, but did a lot of reading, and now I have a lot of notes here. And I don't want
I can see them.
You can see all. You can see all my red pen. So I would like to be able to share these in a way, and I don't feel like I need to say them all tonight, but there's a couple things that really stand out that I think we need to look at. And one is this whole discussion of city neighborhoods and historic preservation and neighborhood stability. And the more I learn about the history of Virginia and the more I think about the history of racism in Virginia, that just seems like code for preserving the old Virginia way. And I really think we need to look at that in a much more holistic way. So, for example, on page 4 of 24, where we talk about existing conditions, neighborhoods, and historic preservation, we're talking about losing the integrity of homes over time. There's all this talk about tearing down houses, and losing the historic character of houses. But I just feel like this is hearkening us back to a time that never actually existed, because a lot of these neighborhoods are a lot nicer now than they used to be because of tear downs or because of renovations. And there's not really any discussion of people who are renovating houses and the difference and what's good in our city about changes that have taken place. But also that whole neighborhood preservation piece, it just makes me really uncomfortable to include it as one of the goals or one of the strategies policies that foster greater neighborhood stability. I feel like there has to be a better way to do that. So I don't know how anyone else feels about that, but it just seems like we can do that in a more progressive way.
So I think the intent of that strategy was to focus on preserving existing tree canopy and also preserving some of the more modest homes is one of the main things there, because a lot of the homes that are being torn down, we have $1 million plus homes going up in their place. So it's making it harder. There's more of a gap in housing prices because of the tear downs. And so that's a big part of that policy.
So can we include that without, I mean, yes, we want to increase tree canopy, and the tree commission actually wrote to that. And if we're maintaining smaller homes, then that also increases affordability. But that's different than keep my enclave neighborhood special and separate. And that's how this reads to me. Well, first it's the existing conditions on page 4 of 24, which just, it doesn't reflect to me what I see the historic progression of Falls Church. It's just hearkening back to something that happened at some point in time, but it doesn't really reflect the progression of our housing and how it's changed. You know, it doesn't say anything that the 1948 to 1965 subdivisions, or when neighborhoods were built and the houses were small because they had to comply with the GI Bill, and now people are doing different things because of different lifestyles and different needs, and they want larger houses. Some people live in houses that are renovated, right? Most of us live in renovated houses. Some people tear down. But the character of the neighborhood is what's there right now. That's the character that has developed over time. And then it doesn't say anything really about segregation or the loss of historically black communities. And I think that's an important, not particularly pleasant, but important part. If we're going to talk about historic preservation and history, I think we just need to acknowledge that part, or not try to preserve neighborhoods in the same way. And I don't mind having a sign that says, you know, this is Fowler's Edition, but I just think it's not the right direction. And I don't know that it necessarily belongs in the housing chapter, because it's more like the Historical Commission or the HARB than actual housing chapter, where we're talking about the kinds of housing that are available.
It is an interesting point that in a city whose property values are so stratospheric, you know, the tone of this, many have lost integrity over time as homes have been torn down and replaced with larger structures. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we're doing a lousy job at something, and yet, you know, we're doing okay in the whole, and that isn't really captured here. I did, on page 14 back there, we're preserving 14 to 24, create policies that foster greater neighborhood stability. I'm not sure stability is quite the right word. I mean, neighborhoods need to be able to change and breathe as times change and new needs arise. And at the same time, I hear what you're trying to achieve, which is at least half the people in town think that, you know, way too much is changing way too fast. And the other half are kind of okay with that, I think. People who are not okay with it, particularly concerned about their neighborhood, their trees, their yards, and we do want to speak to that, I think. I mean, we do want to preserve trees where possible. We want probably some kind of ammunition in here to have a community discussion about changing the rules for tear downs so that, you know, height variances are just not allowed, and some mature trees are spared, and basements, you know, got to have sump pumps because we're not going to allow them to be, you know, 6 feet off the ground. I mean, we need to have that discussion as a community, and this is a place for that to live too.
I think part of the discussion too, though, has to do with new commercial development, and how do you kind of keep that from spreading into neighborhoods. And so we always deal with that, right, in every development, is how do we kind of segregate the new commercial development from an established neighborhood so that, you know, there's traffic calming, there's parking issues, there's a lot of things that, and I don't know if this is sort of getting at that in some way in addition, but to me that is an issue that we need to face with new development, is how do we ensure that it doesn't encroach or spill out in negative ways into existing single-family neighborhoods, because to me, there is this kind of commercial core, and then there's what's behind it we want to maintain and not have that all spill together.
I would agree with that sentiment. I just think the way it's worded
Yeah.
makes me uncomfortable.
Agreed.
Well, I'm glad we finally got rid of the Mayberry RFD passage and vision. It's only taken us 40 years to. I understand what some people here are saying, but I think that housing is just a I don't know what the metaphor is. Third rail. It's the lightning rod. It's you know, if the people in Broadmont see that what you want to change here from maintaining strong neighborhoods is that they understand what you want to do is drop in cottages that take all comers. So if you're a beginning family, you know, just buy one of the cottages, and it's for the very few 750K houses within the Beltway that's affordable. Is that what we're talking about? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know whether we want to, sacrifice the good for the sake of other stuff. I think that there's enough language here to get us to give us plenty to work on, actually. So, curious blend of strategies as well as objectives in this thing, which is, I think stands for some discussion going forward. So, quite a bit.
Other Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't necessarily read into the existing conditions maybe the same way that Vice Mayor Connolly does, although I think I can appreciate the concern or the sentiment. My understanding of this, and I applaud you guys for this. I mean, I recognize the history of Falls Church, the good parts and the bad parts, but in terms of housing and structure and preservation of some of the houses that remain and the unique architectural design that existed at some point, or were designed at some point since 1699, preserving some of those, and whether you call it charm or not, I look at the differences in preservation of the different types of architectural designs as another form of diversity in terms of the city's kind of character and community. I think it's great that you've got houses that look radically different in some cases, and people have worked very hard to preserve the original structure. And I can also appreciate when people feel that they're up against a wall in terms of needing to build for a growing family and finding that the only outlet that they have is to tear down and rebuild. So I understand that my family's going through that right now. I would like to look for opportunities to balance the preservation of some of the existing structures, embrace the ability to diversify housing stock with options other than tear down. And I know that in some cases that is the only option, so I'm not anti-tear down per se. But I think we've talked about in the past, like accessory dwelling units in the backyard, changing zoning provisions that allow for someone to build a separate structure in the backyard to have a child that's coming home from college, or making it easier to add that square footage without having to feel that the economics only warrants you tearing down and starting over. And so I don't know exactly what that means in terms of changing our housing code, but I love the idea of preserving mature trees, existing structures, and renovating in place, and putting the appropriate mechanisms in place for it to make sense. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to housing, a lot of people are making a decision based on their financial needs or what their family needs. And when you start to weigh the pros and cons of it, or what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, sometimes you feel, you know what, I've got to buy a $650,000 World War II era salt box home, tear it down, and rebuild, as opposed to being able to work within the provisions of our housing code to build what makes sense and preserve some of that without having to clear cut the entire lot, so to speak. So I for one like the idea of preserving some of the old, and I don't look at it as a slight or an embracing anything that has a negative connotation in the city's history. And I think it's charming, and it's one of the things that makes the city charming, is that you've got those historic structures here, and you've got a diversified housing stock in terms of design. And so I guess what I'm saying in rambling is that I'd like to provide more opportunities. I'm self-aware, at least, that I've been rambling. I'd like to find the opportunity for people to have those options to renovate in place and to maintain that canopy, design, structure, options, all of that. So that's the cake. I don't know how to make it necessarily, but that's the cake I'm looking for. The other piece, because I saw Mr. Benton over there shaking his head when there was a comment made about the change between small town character and close-knit community. I wasn't there for that conversation and what led to that change. Was there a negative connotation associated with this idea of small town character?
As far as using the term small town character,
Yeah,
a lot of people
mhm.
thought that we're not a town.
Yeah.
The city is not a town, so using the term small town character didn't really resonate with the public.
So it was more of a recognition of the fact that we're all grown up and we're a more densely populated community with densely
Diverse.
populated commercial areas.
Diverse.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of small town. I mean, a small town's got fewer structures, at least in my mind.
We don't have enough picket fences in this city.
Oh, man, I like picket fences. They're nice. So that was the reason it wasn't small-mindedness associated with small town, right? That wasn't it? Okay. All right. That's good to know.
On that same one, I'd actually like to suggest that we take out close-knit community and just say, create and maintain a diverse supply of housing that supports an inclusive and diverse community, period. Because I think close-knit is another one of those, you're on the inside because you're close-knit, and if you're not, you don't belong. And it reminds me of a Mean Girls kind of thing in high school where you're on the inside. And that was part of the conversation, actually, about the small-town character when we were there with the Housing Commission and the Human Services Advisory Committee. They didn't like small-town character because they felt like it wasn't, we weren't small-town enough, or we were too small-towny, but it seemed too closed to them to call us a small town. Whereas Phil and Letty and I were at that meeting, and we thought, no, we are a small town because we know each other and everybody is part of something. But they were saying that everybody really isn't part of something because you have some people that live in, large mixed-use buildings that aren't mixing as much with people in single-family homes. So I think I think both of those are kind of a lightning rod, and we should just take it out completely and say inclusive community.
Other thoughts, other comments? Sure.
So fair access. I see in the graph, the matrix here that you guys have. I always think of that in terms of like fair housing laws. How does Falls Church grade in terms of fair housing? I know that fair access is checked the box over here as it relates to the pricing and targeting a housing stock that's more affordable. I don't know if I think of that necessarily as fair access, more as a just diversified housing stock, but fair access in terms of fair housing laws. How do we rank?
So that's correct. So fair access relates to fair housing. And what the city does is every other year we do fair housing testing. And what that involves is having 2 teams of testers go into a property and, for example, may test on the basis of race. So may have a Caucasian team and may have an African American team, more Hispanic team, and see if there's any differences in how they're treated or what the lease-up requirements are. And so this testing is conducted every other year in the City of Falls Church, and the City of Falls Church usually does very well.
Okay. How does that work with because it's checked off the box in terms of short term for establishing housing targets for different price points and housing sizes? Is there something in fair housing about price and size amongst housing stock to be able to offer from an affordability perspective? And I'm asking that as truly I don't know. I mean, is there we have to provide a certain amount
That's not a fair housing.
Okay,
Right,
okay.
right, that's not a fair housing
Okay.
issue. It's an affordable
It's an
housing issue.
affordability issue,
But not part of the
okay.
federal standards for fair housing.
I didn't know if there was something that we were challenged in terms of the developments that we're approving and whether it's a percent affordable dwelling or whatnot. Okay.
So while you're on page 15, just looking at the whole range of all these things, if you take that house that looks like the BMW Roundel, it actually goes to granny housing, accessory dwelling units, and things like that. If we just did that, that would be a major change for this entire city. You could just forget everything else and just do that. That would change the character of the city. It would also give you the ability to check the box here, aging in place, check the box here with regard to fair access. Well, why do I say that? It's because, as many boxes you can check on that line, that just bumps it up to something we need to consider for policy. Again, perhaps, but I would be in favor of that conversation.
I second that.
So check those boxes.
Now's the time for me to talk.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just want to second Ms. Hardy's conviction about the fields. I mean, this is all really interesting stuff, and, what the world's going to be like in 2045 is great, but you know what? Unless we get a fire lit under us, we're going to lose much of the diversity in our school system that many people highly prize when the Fields goes off tax program. So we need to be having a very serious discussion in next year's budget about allocating a penny of the tax rate at least to the fund, which would enable us to rescue the Fields in some sense. It's a business deal that, we don't want to show our cards on too much, but yet we need to do something now because we don't want to wait 5 years because we will find it too painful in 5 years, I think, to do what needs to be done. So let's not lose sight of that in this bigger, broader discussion. The second thing I wanted to just ask for a crosswalk of, so the chart on page 13 of 24, projection of future housing units, tells us that today we have roughly 5,400 housing units, and in 2045 we're going to have roughly 9,400. So we're going to add 4,000 housing units in the next 30 years. How does that relate to the chart that we were talking about earlier in terms of, the percentage of high-income people and the amount of housing that we're going to build for them relative to others? So over the next 40 years, 30 years, we're going to add 4,000 units. In order for things to land where we think they should land, what are we tasked to do every year? In other words, what is the composition of each of those 5-year increment housing numbers going to be? We're going to build 524 units by 2020. Actually, we're going to build more than that if we pursue the West Falls Church project the way we say we are. We're going to build about 1,000. How are those units going to add up in the affordability range? And then off we go. We're going to build roughly 900 units in the next decade. We need to be thinking about, where we're going to put those housing units and what kind of housing units they're going to be in terms of affordability.
So, Phil, if we go back to the strategies on page 14, maybe a strategy should be to put money into the Affordable Housing Fund. Is that a strategy or is that a project policy action?
Action.
That's more of an action. Is it in here? Project policy action? On the top of page 16. Okay. The dollar going in. The begging bowl there. So I'm just wondering if that needs to go more at the top instead of the very last thing. I think that needs to be up higher based upon what 3 of us at least have said.
Yes, so that was going to be my comment is, there's like 20 things that we could do here. I think it needs to be like next to the fields, this needs to be the number 2, because all these things that we talk about, giving rental assistance, first, time home buyer, like all these things cost money, and we have yet to put any money in our affordable housing fund. And we can certainly fight about it again next March about whether we're willing to carve out money in our operating budget. But I would like staff to come to us with options on how we can actually replenish that fund, whether it's meals tax increase like Alexandria did, or revenue bonds. I know we don't have much bonding capacity, but there's other options and other ways to kind of fund that. And I think we need to think about that more seriously, not only for the fields, but for the sake of all these other actions we say are also important to do. So I would like to elevate the importance of that one as well.
Maybe, Mr. Shields, you can give us an update, possibly in closed session if need be, on the fields and your thoughts on that in the near future. Other comments?
So I have a lot of other comments that I'm not going to burden everyone else with, but I think one thing I think needs to happen is the Housing Commission needs to see this, because just like Ms. Hardy and I have been waiting 6 months to talk about it, they have too. And they've only had that one meeting that was a shared human services meeting, and I feel like they need to look at this now after they saw your presentation and be able to do all these red lines that I did, or I can sit with them as well, or I can sit with you. And I think the Human Services Advisory Committee needs to do that as well, because there's a lot of stuff in here and there's a lot of experts on those groups. So as we look at the calendar going forward, I think we do need to.
So we are on the
that?
July 9th Housing Commission meeting agenda.
But is that after the Planning Commission?
That would be after the Planning Commission work
So
session.
what Mr. Shields just said is that the Planning Commission has got to be the final say. So I think we need to put everything back into August or September. I'm so sorry to say that, because I know you love when I say that, but I think we need, I think we need more time. I feel like this is like a really good first draft, but even as I read some of the paragraphs, I was like, what does that exactly mean? I think we need to do a stronger deep dive into what it says and then where all these things fall.
What was that date again for the Housing Commission?
July 9th.
And so are there other thoughts? Do other people feel that maybe it needs just a bit more time for this? Mr. Z says no. I think his head seems to be saying no. How do other folks feel? Ms. Hardy says yes. Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, so what I'm interested in is the fiscal elements of this. That is, and maybe more time is warranted, but I am interested in how are we going to do all this and still keep our tax rate affordable? Because that's part of affordability as well. And how do we keep within that slice, if you will, of jurisdictions our size? And fact is that according to recent school ratings, there are schools outside of the city of Falls Church in our region that rate as high or higher than ours do with significantly lower tax rates. So I think we need, I just want an eye. I want to do as many of these things as we can do, but I think we also need some sort of fiscal understanding about what it is, or just a generic note that, of course, this will be considered, and maybe we can get past it with some generic language about, of course, this will be considered within the larger range of budgetary issues. I don't disagree with anything that we've said here. And it is true that we have lost a lot of income diversity in this city that I've witnessed since way back in the Stone Age when I first started. So I'm totally in sync with that. And I came from a very vibrant area, small city with a lot of income diversity. So I'm fully in sync with all of this, but I want us to also understand that if we affect this, it's going to affect that. And I think there are a range of things. We want to do as many of these as we can do, but at the same time, we need to maintain basic services like the schools, public safety, which, by the way, we're going to need to put more money into public safety with vertical policing, with increased heights, with virtually every ambulance response I've seen in the city lately has come from Fairfax County. So I think we have a lot of doing this reflects that, and I would hope that that would come as part of our decision-making process as to how to implement all these things. And I would just like some sort of a note along that line. And again, all these are good. And I get everything that we've said, but I want something here that says this is an important issue, but we could achieve affordability for some while we're making it unaffordable for others, thereby defeating the very thing that we're trying to do. And I think we've all worked very hard to prevent that from happening. So I just would like some recognition of that. That's all.
All right, thank you. Are there other comments? So it sounds like at least 3 people would like to spend a little more time on this document. Is it possible, is there a planning commission meeting kind of immediately after the housing commission meeting that we could try to wrap this up before it gets too late?
So they would meet again on July 15th, and that would be their only other meeting in July unless we did a special meeting.
Of the planning commission?
The planning commission, correct.
So what do you all think about housing commission on the 9th and planning commission on the 15th?
Is the housing commission set to meet on the 9th? They meet in July? And then what about the Human Services Advisory Committee? They meet in July, Nancy?
Yes. They meet on
For
the
the
third
15th?
Thursday.
So they meet after the planning commission's acted.
So does the planning commission meet in August?
Yes.
They do meet in August.
Mhm.
What day do they meet in August?
Do not have a calendar.
Approximately, do we
Probably
know?
the first Monday?
Yeah,
Is
it's
it
a first and third Monday.
All right.
Mhm.
So would that work for you?
So if they met August 1st and discussed it August 1st, then we have a meeting August. Oh. And ours would be August 12th.
Guess going together someplace?
I will be here, not that you need me.
Can the planning commission vote on August 5th and we put it on the first meeting in September? Because we can't change it anyway. If the planning commission's going to vote on it, and we have to vote with what the planning commission says, that it doesn't.
Well, I do think what is potentially an option is the planning commission's meeting that first Monday in August. So the council could act on that meeting on August, I don't know the date, but I think it's August 12th, right? So there's 2 members that are missing. So that's what you were trying to avoid. I'm sorry.
Right, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
If 2 members, if everybody wants to be here to vote on this, we could, since we can't make any changes anyway after the planning commission, then we'd have to, it could be the 12th, or it could just be the first meeting in September.
So, part of so from the planning staff's perspective, we've got work to do on the environmental services chapter. So, with the way we sequence these now, and Shayna's working that chapter as well. So it would be, yeah.
Welcome to Falls Church.
I'm happy to do that. I can meet with Nancy and Shayna together, and I could go over all these red circles.
I think that would be very helpful.
Okay.
And let's, why
Sardi
don't
could
we do
join.
that,
Yeah,
see
you
where
wanna join
we
too?
sit, and also have that meeting with the Housing Commission, and maybe at that point gauge where we are. If the Housing Commission in particular feels like there's a big gap, then maybe we need some extra time. If we feel like we've closed that gap and we're in good shape, we try to keep it on for the 22nd of July.
For us. So when would the planning commission meet then?
So they would stay for the 15th. So this all presumes that on July 9th, the Housing Commission has its final work on it. The Planning Commission likes all those changes, and it all gets wrapped up at that meeting on July 15th, so it comes to the council with
Okay.
everybody feeling like we've got it where we want it to be.
Okay.
Okay. So does that sound like a plan to everybody?
Could you repeat what the plan is? I'm sorry.
So what we've just articulated is to try to keep this schedule with the addition, the Housing Commission is in here on July 9th. And we'll sort of do a touch base then as to whether we're on track for the Planning Commission to take its final action on the 15th so that the council can take its action on the 22nd. If the Housing Commission isn't happy, then we'll need to take some extra time.
Is the council gonna see this before we have to vote on it? I mean, it seems to me that's I have no doubt that the improvements will be significant, but it would be great to, like, see this, and other than having to rubber stamp it because the planning commission has approved it. So it seems, Mr. City Manager, that, you know, we need a little bit of an adjustment in that schedule somewhere.
So just what happens, if we just don't like it, then we are not going to vote for it.
Yeah, so if,
Right, and then we'll
if the
have to go to
council
the planning
doesn't
commission
like
again.
it, then it needs to go back to the planning commission
Anyway.
to get cleaned up.
Right. So that would still be available to us,
But
right?
Yes, but I mean, as I understand, there are a fair number of edits.
No, I
And
agree.
it's really not fair to put us, you have to vote up or down, when the reality is you may like a lot of it, but you wanted a few
No,
things, you know, and we're not in that
I think it's,
position.
I think, you know, it's 50-50 right now, I would say, that we would vote for it, even if all marvelous work is done and so forth, because we have a lot of issues.
Yeah, we've been looking at this thing for the better part of a year already, and my observations the last few times that we've seen this, it's, we're just basically nibbling at the edges here. I mean, there've been no new radical, huge things that we didn't think of doing. It's prettier. I mean, I've seen most of these things before. I think that, I don't know that Vice Mayor Connolly has huge substantive things that you want to add or change. It's just degrees of emphasis and maybe some
It's not
wordsmithing.
huge, right, it's not huge substantive things, but it's more,
I'm not saying it's not important.
yeah, right. But I do think that I shouldn't just say, hey, make all these changes, because I think I circled them in red. I do think other people need to
Well, it's
weigh
gonna
in
come
on
back
those
to us.
changes.
It's gonna come
Did you
back
do
to
it
us as a
red? I
draft.
did them in
Okay, well,
red.
if you're there in red, I think we gotta go.
You're gonna go with my red pen.
At least, I mean, I've gone to a couple of housing meetings, but I've relied on you and Letty to really dive into the weeds of this. I must say that what you said about the existing conditions page, I don't like any of it. I mean, I really don't. That's no reflection on people who drafted it. I mean, it has an essentially negative view of the changes that have occurred in Falls Church since, 2000. And I would, there are little hints of, it wasn't so bad. Like at the bottom of page 6, it says, homeowners seeking to increase their home size and energy efficiency. Yes, there we go. That's a little more uplifting. That's why we're tearing down, dumpy little 1948 brick Cape Cod houses and building nice, newer, more efficient houses. And that spirit is not captured in existing conditions at all.
Why don't we do probably need to wrap this up in some fashion. And so how about we follow the original plan of Wyatt laid out, but not necessarily to vote on the whatever day we're talking about, but maybe just could we get a report in the meantime, and then we can figure out, for example, after you go to the Housing Commission, did you not want to go to the Planning Commission until we see it again? Is that what people want to do, or is it okay to at least get input from the Planning Commission?
I think that sounds like what we want to do, is we want the Housing Commission to see it, and then we want to see it again before it goes to the Planning Commission, to make sure that these changes reflect what we want. Then it goes to the Planning Commission, then we get one more vote.
Okay. And then we stop. Yeah.
The Plan Commission's been, they're appointed and important members of the community. They've been there, they're thoughtful people, and I think that, I don't know that we need to hold their hand necessarily. You're about to make some changes here. I don't know what they are, but quite frankly, they don't have that much importance to me, because I don't think you're going to alter the structure, direction, policy, and focus, and all the key elements that form the foundation. Similarly, I don't know that we could improve it or add to it or modify significantly so the Planning Commission would say, well, we don't like this, and I don't want to be in a position of saying to the Planning Commission, well, we've now spent 7 work sessions on this, and it's perfect at this point. You need to prove it. So we need to let them do their work. They're planners. They
All
look
right,
at
what
this
else does
from that
everyone else have to
perspective.
say? Okay, not jumping into this mess, all right? Smart
But
man,
I'll
Russ.
meet with Nancy and Shayna.
Okay.
And then they can take my comments and add them in. But same as you're gonna do a draft of this one for us to see, right? The demographics chapter, so share a draft before it goes anywhere else. Right. Right.
Are you okay with that?
I'll be at the Housing Commission meeting, so we'll see how that goes.
Are you okay with that?
We could do some, council members also just to walk through, because the point about not putting the council in an awkward position on the 22nd, that's a point well taken. We don't want to do that. So we'll try to assess, make sure that we are in a place that strategies, goals, and objectives in this and we'll know that prior to the 22nd, so you're not in an awkward spot.
So we'll be relying on you and the members of council who have taken the lead on this to give us their thoughts in the interim. All right, does that sound like a plan? Okay. All right, listen, thank particularly those who've spent, Ms. Hardy, Ms. Conley, and Mr. Duncan have spent a great deal of time on this to date. So, and you all, of course, as well, and got a little bit more to go, but hopefully we're coming down the stretch run here. Is there any
A quick comment. I just wanted to say that I think all of our comments really just reflect how passionate we are about this topic. I think you all have done really important work, and I think it just reflects that this council in particular really cares about this. So thank you.
All right, so now we're on to schedule and council requests. Are there any comments in this arena? Mr. Z?
I do have one, which is to ask the Government Operations Committee to take a look at the salary of adjoining jurisdictions in Northern Virginia that are similar size to us with regard to what their elected officials receive in salary. And just to report back to us what you've been able to find. I'm not asking for any action beyond that. But hopefully before we break for summer recess, and speaking of which, I won't be here on the 12th of August.
Yes, the GovOps Committee will be happy to take that on.
Can I ask, what's the purpose of this? Why are we doing this?
I just think it's worth doing once in a while, just to quiet the mutterings of those that think that we're not getting paid enough.
Yeah, I don't dissent from that, but thanks for explaining that. Thank you.
All right, are there other comments or schedule issues?
Yeah, did you want to go ahead?
After you.
It's just about the sidewalk grinding. It's not.
No, I was going to make a
Got that.
discussion about the next meeting of the council.
It's a joke. I know you got that covered. Two things. One, I would like to put back on the table discussion over CPACE ordinance, financing of development of energy efficient renovations in commercial buildings. My understanding is that there will be a developer at some point in the future that is going to be coming forward with a project, and there will be some discussion over CPACE ordinance. Arlington has recently passed CPACE ordinance that will allow other local jurisdictions to ride their administrative process to make it easier on us. Mr. Z, I'm sure you are.
As has Fairfax.
As Fairfax. Loudon is also helping pave the way. Virginia's put a lot of work as a state behind CPACE ordinances. And as we talk about diversifying our housing stock and new commercial developments, it would warrant a conversation over making it easier for developers to finance at little or no cost to the jurisdiction here, Falls Church, to encourage energy efficient, sustainable building practices. And CPACE is a good program, and it's one that we can do and pursue administratively with little burden on Falls Church. So I would ask that we put a CPACE ordinance draft on, or that discussion in the works in the hopper here.
Yes, and by CPACE you mean commercial property assessed clean energy.
Nailed it.
That is correct, and I think that is on the council's formal adopted work plan, and so we will bring that to you.
Right.
And
thank you for that. And I noticed 2 times this past week the 4 chargers you have up front have 75% utilization, and the last one we don't know because some workman had his pickup truck parked there. That wasn't.
I was going to say that wasn't a plug-in pickup
wasn't
truck.
A blue Ford F-150. No, it wasn't.
No, man, because I'm waiting for one of those.
Ones have been in use too.
And then finally, to beat this one to death, Dave Tax has pinged a few of us again about resolving the sewer line issue. Do we have any updates on getting him together with Robert Goff and lifting up a manhole to put an end to this?
I can't promise putting an end to it. The city has been very clear in what I read of the situation, and that has been communicated formally to Mr. Tax through the years. Mr. Tax does not like that answer. I have offered a meeting with him again, and so I'll let the council know when that happens. It will be very soon.
It seems to me it's a disagreement over the size of the pipe, and the size of the pipe would warrant whether or not it's the city's responsibility to clear that pipe or not. And I don't know if it's just three people going together and lifting up a manhole cover and looking at it together and then putting an end to that debate once and for all. Maybe it is more complicated than that, but I feel like if everybody got together and just laid eyes on it, it's a pretty binary decision to be made. So,
Artie?
Two other things I wanted to get on the calendar. Scooter policy. I'd like that to be an upcoming work session with more than enough time for us to weigh in on so that Virginia does not mandate one for us. And I think in the last budget, we had I think 100,000 or maybe 150 in spot improvements around town. So I'd love to see what Public Works is going to work on next, because I think we hear a lot often about where people would love to see walkability or safety improvements. So I think council probably would like to weigh in on those.
Mr. Duncan.
So, boom, boom. My questions are about the Fellows property. Some of these things, not tonight and probably not even Wednesday, but maybe by next Monday, when we're going to have a really big meeting that the manager's going to tell us about. But the Fellows property, how's that coming? We've got ready. I see that Larry Graves Park is underway. That's a good sign. Something else that we might want to take note of and celebrate when it's completed. I don't know how long that project's expected to take, but that would be nice to know. Agree with Mr. Hardy on scooters. Pictures are turning up in social media of people riding scooters in the city, which is technically illegal, I understand. So it needs to get done in a hurry. The meeting about a variance on a house that is going up on 703 Hillwood Avenue has come to my attention. Apparently the meeting was canceled for, I'm sure, good reasons, having to do with the applicant withdrawing and revising perhaps what he plans to do. But my question is just about notice. When meetings of that sort, which are noticed to the neighborhood, I think by mail, certainly, are canceled, do we post something on a bulletin board, or do we try to send the word out by email so that folks will know not to plan their lives around a meeting that gets canceled? Those are, not really high-profile meetings for most of the city, but for the people who are involved, it's very important. And I've had a question about notification about cancellation of those meetings when that happens. And is everybody going to be here on July the 8th? I forget. Who's planning to be? Are you coming back? You will not be here July. Is everybody else going to be here at our meeting, as far as we know? Okay. And Thompson's Italian Restaurant is hiring on Thursday, so go up, and hopefully that means it'll be opening soon.
Okay, anything else? Mr. Shields, Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks a lot. So NVTA last Thursday night approved our project agreement for the 15 million. Sorry about that, for that project. So hopefully that's another step taken. Thanks Cindy and Carrie and everybody involved. So that was good. So NVTA is starting its new 6-year plan. So I think as I talk to Cindy, we're going to have a lot of work to do over the course of the summer to make sure what projects we want and how to fit them in with the various criteria for NVTA, NVTC for the next round of Route 66 monies, and then the VDOT 6-year plan. So we got a lot of work to do to figure out those transportation elements that will best serve us. Secondly, the Council of Governments Board of Directors had a very interesting discussion on housing policy, exactly what we've discussed tonight, and I would urge that staff reach out to the COG. I think the Urban Institute made a good presentation, and there was a lot of good regional discussion about potential policies and issues regarding housing. So it would be good if we brought that stream into our stream of thinking on the housing issues as well, because it sounded like there was some pretty good stuff. I think that's it for right now. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Shields?
Just a couple of notes on upcoming schedule. So at the council's meeting on the 24th, we'll have the unveiling of the cornerstone for the expansion at City Hall. And then for your regular meeting, which will start at 7:30, we'll have some pomp and circumstance to note this historic occasion of having our governing body meet for the first time in the new council chambers. Invitations have gone out. We do have members of the judicial branch that will be there. Friends and guests are all welcome. So that's going to be a great night for the city. So 6 p.m. is the unveiling of the cornerstone, then a reception, open house. People can walk through the building. And then at 7:30 is when the council meeting will start per your normal time. So we're looking forward to that very nice event. The July 8th meeting, which we just mentioned a moment ago, that is the sort of the last of the beginning steps on the West Falls Church project, with the special exception entitlement being on the council's agenda for that night. In addition, we will also have the conveyance agreement of the land by the school board to the city council as part of the 9.45 acres that would be put under lease to the development team. And in exchange for that, the city is, the way the agreement is crafted, is conveying the football field and the mulch pile parcel to the school board to consolidate that parcel, which is a needed action because the school board would straddle that line. So those are two big things that are coming up on July 8th. I am the city manager. I am scheduled a vacation right after that on July 9th, and I'll send that out by email, but I wanted council to be aware of that as well. That's all I have for schedule.
We're just one last, go ahead, Mr.
One more thing. One of the things that we're still out there to be done under the council's work plan is this innovation task force.
Right.
And I would ask members of council or anyone you speak with, what issues would you like that task force to take up? I mean, clearly transportation, autonomous vehicles, clearly energy type issues, but please, whether they be communications, energy, transportation, whatever, please send those to Wyatt. I'm going to designate you and copy me so that we can get that whole effort off the ground. So that we can manage the technology rather than it managing us, if that's possible. Thanks.
One last thing, we are trying to put together another solarized dinner, which would be Fairfax City, Vienna, and Falls Church. They may happen next month sometime, kind of mid-July. I think Fairfax is hosting, so stay tuned. What's that?
No vacation.
Anything else anybody wants to add, or is that it for tonight?
Move to adjourn.
All right, let's do it.